A king banished the princess to live in a remote village. 7 years later, he was shocked to see her happy with a farmer and a child. Victoria stood on the balcony of the royal palace, the cool evening breeze carrying the scent of blooming roses from the garden below. Her gaze remained fixed on the diplomatic quarters where Lawrence would be waiting. The negotiations between their kingdoms had stretched on for weeks now, but for Victoria, each passing day only strengthened the dangerous feelings growing in her heart. "Your Highness," a soft voice interrupted her thoughts. "Your father has requested your presence at dinner tonight. The French delegation will be in attendance." Victoria turned to face her lady-in-waiting, unable to hide the flush that colored her cheeks. "Thank you, Eliza. Please inform my father I shall be there shortly." As Eliza departed, Victoria pressed a hand to her racing heart. Another evening in Lawrence's presence, another night of stolen glances across the banquet table, another opportunity for disaster. Their kingdoms stood on the brink of war. And here she was, the only daughter of King Jefferson, hopelessly entangled with a French diplomat. The grand dining hall buzzed with conversation when Victoria entered. Her father, King Jefferson, a robust man with a commanding presence, sat at the head of the table, his eyes the same piercing blue that Victoria had inherited, softened momentarily at the sight of his daughter. "Ah, Victoria," he called out. "Come, sit beside Duke Prescott. He's been asking after you all evening." Victoria suppressed a shudder as she took her assigned seat next to her father's uncle and most trusted advisor. The Duke's thin lips curled into what might have been intended as a smile, but never reached his cold eyes. "Princess," he greeted her, his voice like oil over stone. "How fortunate we are to be graced with your beauty this evening." Victoria nodded politely, her attention already drifting across the table to where Lawrence sat among the French diplomats. Their eyes met for the briefest moment. A silent communication that spoke volumes more than words ever could. The dinner proceeded with the usual diplomatic pleasantries, but beneath the surface, tensions simmered. Victoria barely touched her food, the weight of secrets making every bite tasteless. "If I may be excused," she said during a lull in conversation. "I feel a headache coming on." King Jefferson frowned but nodded his permission. As Victoria rose, she noticed Duke Prescott's gaze following her with unsettling intensity. The palace gardens provided the perfect cover for their forbidden meetings. Victoria hurried along the stone pathway, moonlight guiding her steps toward the secluded gazebo. Lawrence was already waiting, his tall frame silhouetted against the night sky. "Victoria." He breathed her name like a prayer as she stepped into his arms. "We must be careful. I saw the way Prescott watched you tonight." She nestled against his chest, savoring the steady beat of his heart. "He suspects nothing. He's merely a vulture, always circling, waiting for weakness." Lawrence pulled back slightly, framing her face with his hands. "Your father would have me executed if he discovered us." "Then we must ensure he doesn't," Victoria replied, rising on her tiptoes to press her lips to his. Their stolen moments had become increasingly reckless over the past months. What had begun as formal introductions had evolved into diplomatic discussions, then private conversations about philosophy and medicine, and finally, inevitably, into this, a love that threatened both their futures. "I've been teaching myself French," Victoria whispered against his mouth, "for when we can finally be together openly." Lawrence smiled sadly. "My brilliant princess, you should be using that mind of yours for greater purposes than loving a simple diplomat." "Simple diplomat," Victoria laughed softly. "You're the chief negotiator for France during the most crucial peace talks of the decade." Their conversation continued late into the night, dreams and fears intermingling as they plotted an impossible future together. Neither noticed the shadow that moved silently among the hedges, watching, listening. The following weeks passed in a blur of secret meetings and mounting tension. The peace negotiations were failing, with neither side willing to compromise. Victoria's heart was torn between loyalty to her kingdom and her love for Lawrence. One evening, as Victoria made her way to their meeting place, a firm hand grabbed her arm, pulling her into the shadows. "Your Highness," Duke Prescott's voice slithered into her ear. "Out for another midnight stroll. Or perhaps meeting your French lover." Victoria's blood turned to ice. "I don't know what you mean, Uncle." His grip tightened painfully. "Do not insult my intelligence, child. I've been watching you both for weeks. What would your father say if he knew his only daughter was betraying him with the enemy?" "Lawrence is not the enemy," Victoria hissed, wrenching her arm free. "And there will be no war if the negotiations succeed." Prescott's laugh was cruel and knowing. Negotiations, oh my dear foolish princess. There will be war because I have ensured it. Your little romance has provided the perfect evidence of French treachery. Before Victoria could respond, palace guards emerged from the darkness, surrounding them. King Jefferson himself appeared, his face a mask of controlled fury. "Father," Victoria began, desperation clawing at her throat. "Please, let me explain." "Silence," the king's voice boomed across the garden. "Duke Prescott has informed me of everything. How long has this treachery been going on?" "It's not treachery," Victoria pleaded. "I love him, father, and the peace." "Peace." King Jefferson's laugh was hollow. "While you were whispering sweet nothings with your French spy, his countrymen were mobilizing troops at our borders." "No." Victoria shook her head frantically. "That can't be true. Lawrence would have told me." "Arrest the French diplomat," the king commanded his guards. "He will be tried for espionage and conspiracy against the crown." Victoria lunged forward, only to be restrained by 2 guards. "Father, please, he's innocent." But King Jefferson had already turned away, his shoulders rigid with disappointment and rage. Duke Prescott remained, watching Victoria with thinly veiled satisfaction. "You're manipulating him," Victoria accused, tears streaming down her face. "Why? What do you gain from war?" "Power, my dear niece," Prescott replied softly. "Something you might have wielded yourself one day, had you not been so foolishly ruled by your heart." The following day, Victoria stood before the entire court, publicly accused of conspiracy against the crown. Lawrence was brought in chains, his proud face bruised from interrogation. For the crime of espionage and seduction of the royal princess, King Jefferson proclaimed, "The French diplomat Lawrence shall be executed at dawn." Victoria's anguished cry echoed through the throne room. "No, father, I beg you, if there must be punishment, let it fall on me alone." The king's eyes were cold as he regarded his daughter. "You are of royal blood, Victoria. Death would be too merciful." He rose from his throne, addressing the hushed court. "Instead, I sentence you to exile. You shall be stripped of all titles, privileges, and possessions. You will live as a commoner in Oak Ridge, the most remote village in our kingdom." His voice dropped lower. "You shall learn what it means to betray your blood for those you consider worthy of your love," as Lawrence was dragged away. His eyes found Victoria's one last time. "Je t'aimerai toujours," he called out. "I will love you always." That night, locked in her chambers awaiting escort to exile, Victoria discovered another consequence of their forbidden love. She was carrying Lawrence's child, pressing her hands to her still flat stomach. She made a silent vow. This child would know nothing of royal cruelty or political games. This child would be raised with love, far from the poisonous influence of court. As dawn broke, Victoria watched from her window as Lawrence was led to the execution block. Her tears had dried, leaving only hollow despair as the axe fell, taking the life of the man she loved. What she couldn't know, as the royal guards came to take her to exile, was that the Queen Mother, Lady Eleanor, had secretly intervened. Lawrence's execution had been staged, his life spared for reasons of her own, but that knowledge would remain hidden from Victoria for years to come. As she faced the harsh reality of her new life in Oak Ridge, the journey to Oak Ridge took 7 grueling days. Victoria sat in a simple wooden cart, her fine clothes replaced with a plain brown dress, her royal jewels confiscated, and her long auburn hair now cut short as a final humiliation. Each bump in the road sent waves of nausea through her body, whether from her pregnancy or from grief, she couldn't tell. "We'll reach Oak Ridge by nightfall, miss," the driver informed her, no longer using her royal title. The man hardly looked at her, as if her disgrace might be contagious. Victoria nodded silently, one hand instinctively moving to her stomach. She had told no one about the child growing within her. It was her secret, her last connection to Lawrence. As the landscape changed from the lush farmlands near the capital to increasingly rugged terrain, Victoria tried to prepare herself mentally. She knew nothing about Oak Ridge except that it was considered the most remote and poorest village in the kingdom. Nestled near the Canadian border, when they finally arrived, the sun was setting behind the distant mountains, casting long shadows over what appeared to be little more than a collection of ramshackle buildings. A small crowd had gathered to witness the arrival of the disgraced princess. News traveled even to this remote outpost. "Here's where you get off," the driver said, stopping the cart in what passed for the village square. He tossed her small bundle of possessions onto the muddy ground. King's orders were to leave you with nothing but the clothes on your back, but I've included a blanket and some bread. God knows you'll need it." Victoria stepped down from the cart, her legs unsteady after days of sitting. The villagers stared at her with expressions ranging from curiosity to outright hostility. "So this is the king's daughter." A weathered old man spat on the ground. "Doesn't look so royal now, does she? They say she betrayed the kingdom for a French lover." A woman whispered loudly enough for Victoria to hear. "Her father's taxes took my youngest son," another shouted. "Couldn't afford to feed him and pay what the crown demanded. Died of fever last winter." Victoria stood straight, chin raised despite the murmurs growing around her. She may have lost her title, but she refused to lose her dignity. An older woman with sharp eyes stepped forward. "I'm Martha, the village elder. We received word you were coming, but nothing about where you're to stay or how you're to live." I don't know," Victoria admitted, her voice hoarse from days of silence. "She can sleep in the stable," someone suggested, drawing cruel laughter. "The king's orders were clear," Martha continued, ignoring the comment. "You're to receive no special treatment. You'll work for your keep like everyone else." She looked Victoria up and down. "What skills do you have, girl, besides wearing fine dresses and dancing at balls?" The question struck Victoria like a physical blow. What skills did she have that would be of any use here? Her education had focused on languages, politics, and court etiquette. "I know some medicine," she answered quietly, thinking of the hours spent with Madre Sarah, the palace healer, secretly learning about herbs and remedies, an interest her father had discouraged as unsuitable for a princess. Martha raised an eyebrow. "Medicine, we have Ruth for that. She's been our healer for 30 years. She's with child," a young woman suddenly called out from the crowd, pointing at Victoria's midsection. Despite the loose dress, someone with knowing eyes had noticed. A new wave of whispers swept through the gathering. "The French lover's bastard," someone said. "She'll bring nothing but trouble. No one will take her in now." Victoria felt tears threatening, but refused to let them fall. She had cried enough. Now was the time for strength, for her child if not for herself. "She can stay with me." The voice was deep and unexpected. The crowd parted as a tall man stepped forward. He was perhaps 30, with broad shoulders, and eyes that seemed to have seen more than his years would suggest. "Everett," Martha said with surprise. "You've barely been here 6 months yourself." "I have room in my cabin," the man called Everett continued, his face unreadable. "And I could use help with the crops." Victoria studied him cautiously. There was something in his manner that seemed oddly familiar, yet she was certain they had never met. His clothing was simple but clean, his hands those of someone accustomed to hard work. "Why would you help her?" someone challenged. Everett shrugged. "My mother taught me that turning away someone in need brings bad fortune." He looked directly at Victoria. "You'll work, and you'll earn your keep. I'm no charity, princess or not." The way he said princess held no mockery. Unlike the others, Victoria found herself nodding. "I accept your offer, and I will work." The crowd dispersed slowly, disapproval evident on many faces. Martha approached Victoria one last time. "Everett keeps to himself mostly. Showed up last winter, bought old Miller's place after he died, works hard, pays his debts, but we know little about him." She lowered her voice. "Be careful, girl. A man who offers shelter to a fallen princess might have motives of his own." Victoria followed Everett down a dirt path leading away from the village center. Neither spoke until they reached a small but sturdy cabin with a plot of land behind it. A thin wisp of smoke rose from the chimney. "It's not much," Everett said, opening the door, "but it's dry and warm." The interior was simple. One main room with a fireplace, a wooden table with 2 chairs, and a small kitchen area. A ladder led to what appeared to be a sleeping loft. "You can take the loft," he said. "I'll sleep down here by the fire." Victoria stood awkwardly, still clutching her small bundle. "Why are you helping me?" Everett busied himself stoking the fire. "Everyone deserves a second chance." He paused, then added, "Even a princess who loved unwisely." Something in his tone made Victoria look at him sharply. "Did you know Lawrence?" A shadow seemed to cross his face. "I know of him. News travels. Even to Oak Ridge." He gestured to a small basin of water. "You can wash up. There's stew in the pot. Eat, then rest. Tomorrow comes early here." That night, lying on a straw mattress so different from her palace bed, Victoria finally allowed her tears to fall. She cried for Lawrence, for their child who would never know its father, for the life she had lost. Through the floorboards, she could hear Everett moving quietly below. and wondered again at his unexpected kindness. Morning came with rooster crows and pale light streaming through the small window. Victoria woke disoriented, her body aching from the unfamiliar bed. For a moment, she thought she was back in the palace, but the rough blanket and the scent of wood smoke quickly reminded her of her new reality. "You'll need these," Everett said when she climbed down the ladder. He handed her a pair of worn boots and some clothes that appeared to belong to a boy. "They'll fit better than what you're wearing, especially as the child grows." Victoria accepted them wordlessly, struck again by his matter-of-fact kindness. "The garden needs weeding, and the chickens need feeding," he continued, pulling on his own boots. "I'll be in the fields. There's bread and eggs on the table." Left alone, Victoria looked around the cabin that would now be her home. Through the window, she could see the village of Oak Ridge in the distance, smoke rising from morning fires. Beyond that, dense forests stretched to mountains on the horizon, the border with Canada, and the edge of her father's kingdom. She placed a hand on her stomach. "We'll survive this," she whispered to her unborn child. "We'll build a new life here, far from palaces and politics." But as she stepped outside into the cool morning air, Victoria couldn't ignore the knot of fear in her chest. How would she, a princess raised in luxury, survive in this harsh place where people already resented her? How would she give birth without the royal physicians? And how could she trust this stranger, Everett, whose kindness seemed as mysterious as it was unexpected? The answers would come with time. For now, she had weeds to pull and a new life to build from nothing. 5 years passed like the changing seasons in Oak Ridge, each day blending into the next with a rhythm Victoria had never known in the palace. The small cabin she shared with Everett had expanded, with a new room added for Gabriel, her son who now ran through the fields with boundless energy, his dark curls bouncing in the sunlight. "Mama, look what I found," Gabriel called, racing toward her with something clutched in his small hands. At 5 years old, he was the spitting image of Lawrence, the same warm brown eyes, the same curious expression. Victoria set down her basket of freshly gathered herbs and knelt to examine his treasure. "What is it, my love?" "Mr. Everett says it's a robin's egg." Gabriel opened his palms carefully to reveal a perfect blue shell. "He says it fell from the nest, but we shouldn't put it back because the mother won't take it now that we touched it." Victoria smiled, her heart swelling with love for this child who had become her whole world. "It's beautiful. Perhaps we can keep it in your collection." Gabriel nodded excitedly before running off again, this time toward Everett, who was working at the edge of their vegetable garden. The man straightened as the boy approached, his face softening into a smile as he always did for Gabriel. The transformation of Everett over these 5 years had been almost as remarkable as Victoria's own. The guarded, mysterious man who had offered her shelter had gradually let down his walls, becoming not just her protector but her friend. And to Gabriel, a father in every way that mattered, Victoria watched them together, Gabriel helping Everett plant seeds in neat rows, asking endless questions that Everett answered with inexhaustible patience. They were a family, pieced together by circumstance but bound now by genuine love. "Ruth is asking for you." Martha's voice interrupted Victoria's thoughts. The village elder had softened toward Victoria over the years, especially after Victoria had successfully helped deliver Martha's granddaughter during a difficult birth when Ruth's traditional methods had failed. "Is it her joints again?" Victoria asked, gathering her basket. Martha nodded. "Worse with the spring rains. Your willow bark tea was the only thing that gave her relief last time." Victoria smiled. "I'll visit her this afternoon." What had begun as a desperate mention of medical knowledge that first night in Oak Ridge had become Victoria's new identity. The years of secret lessons with Madre Sarah at the palace. Hours spent learning which plants healed and which harmed. How to set bones and stitch wounds had proven more valuable than all her royal education. Her path to becoming Oak Ridge's trusted healer hadn't been easy. Ruth, the village's aging midwife, had initially seen Victoria as a threat, scoffing at the fancy palace medicine Victoria had learned. But when fever swept through Oak Ridge during Victoria's first winter, and her remedies saved several children, attitudes began to change. Now, Victoria's small garden of medicinal herbs was a source of pride, and people from neighboring villages sometimes came seeking her help. The calluses on her once soft hands were badges of honor, proof of a life rebuilt through work and determination. "You're thinking about the past again," Everett said quietly, coming to stand beside her as Gabriel ran off to play with the blacksmith's children. "I can always tell when you're there. Your eyes get that faraway look," Victoria sighed. "Not the past, just marveling at how much has changed. She glanced at him. "I never thanked you properly, for everything." Everett's expression remained neutral, but she caught the flicker of something deeper in his eyes, the same shadow that appeared whenever conversation veered too close to their beginnings, or his life before Oak Ridge. "There's nothing to thank me for," he replied. "You've more than earned your place here." Later that afternoon, as Victoria walked through the village to visit Ruth, she reflected on how differently the villagers regarded her now. Where once there had been open hostility, now there were friendly nods and greetings. She was no longer the disgraced princess, but Victoria the healer. Gabriel's mother, Everett's, friend, partner? They had never defined what they were to each other. There had been a moment, 3 winters ago, when their relationship had shifted. Gabriel had been desperately ill with croup. His breathing labored. For 3 terrifying nights, Victoria and Everett had taken turns holding the boy upright. Steam from boiling herbs filling the cabin as they fought to ease his breathing. On the 3rd night, when Gabriel's fever finally broke and he fell into a peaceful sleep, Victoria had collapsed into Everett's arms, exhausted and relieved. He had held her as she cried, his own tears mingling with hers. After that, something had changed between them, a current of unspoken feeling that neither had been brave enough to name. "Victoria," Ruth's raspy voice called from her doorway. The old woman leaned heavily on a walking stick, her face creased with pain, but her eyes still sharp. "About time you got here. My bones feel like they're being twisted by the devil himself," Victoria smiled, pushing away her thoughts. "Let's see what we can do about that." Inside Ruth's small cottage, as she prepared the willow bark tea and massaged the old woman's gnarled hands with a salve of comfrey and lavender, Ruth studied her with knowing eyes. "You and that man of yours should stop dancing around each other," she said bluntly. "Life's too short for such foolishness." Victoria felt heat rise to her cheeks. "Everett isn't my man. He's Gabriel's guardian, my friend." "Pa," Ruth interrupted. "I may be old, but I'm not blind. I see how he looks at you when you're not watching, and how you look at him." Victoria focused intently on wrapping Ruth's hands with clean cloth. "It's complicated," Ruth snorted. "Only because you make it so still holding on to ghosts, are you?" The question hit closer to home than Ruth could know. Despite the years that had passed, Victoria still sometimes woke from dreams of Lawrence, his face fading a little more each time. The pain had dulled, but guilt remained. Guilt that she could find happiness when he was gone. Guilt that Gabriel would never know his real father. "The past doesn't just disappear," Victoria said softly. "No," Ruth agreed, her voice gentler now, "but it shouldn't stop you from living either." That evening, as Victoria prepared dinner in their cabin, Everett sat at the table, helping Gabriel with his letters. Victoria had insisted on teaching her son to read and write, skills rare among the villagers, but ones she considered essential. "Will I ever go to a big city, Mama?" Gabriel asked suddenly, looking up from his slate. "Like in the stories you tell?" Victoria and Everett exchanged a quick glance. She had told Gabriel simplified stories of her life before, careful to omit anything about royalty or her true origins. "Perhaps someday," she answered carefully. "Why do you ask?" Gabriel shrugged. "Thomas says his father went to the capital once. He says there are buildings taller than trees and more people than stars in the sky." His eyes shone with childish wonder. "Is that true?" "Not quite that many," Victoria said with a smile. "But yes, there are many people and tall buildings. Would you like to see the capital someday?" "Gabriel?" Everett asked, his tone casual but his eyes watchful. Gabriel considered this for a moment, then shook his head. "I think I like it better here. Thomas's father said it was too noisy and smelled bad. He went back to his letters, the curiosity satisfied for now." After Gabriel was asleep in his small bed, Victoria and Everett sat by the fire, the comfortable silence of long companionship between them. "He's going to ask more questions as he gets older," Everett said at last. "About his father, about your past." Victoria nodded, watching the flames dance. "I know. I've thought about what I'll tell him. And the truth, or parts of it at least." She looked at Everett. "That his father was a good man who died before he was born. That I once lived in the capital but found a better life here." Everett's expression was unreadable in the firelight. "And what about us? What will you tell him about what I am to him?" The question hung in the air between them, loaded with 5 years of unspoken feelings. Victoria reached out, tentatively placing her hand over his. "You're the man who took us in when no one else would, who has been a father to him in every way that matters." She paused, gathering courage. And to me, you've been everything I never knew I needed." Everett turned his hand to clasp hers, his eyes suddenly intense with emotion he usually kept carefully guarded. "Victoria, there's something I need to tell you. Something I should have told you long ago." A frantic knocking at the door cut him off. Martha's grandson stood there, breathless and wide-eyed. "Victoria, you must come quickly. It's Jenkins's wife. The baby's coming early. And there's blood. So much blood." Victoria was already reaching for her medicine bag, the moment with Everett broken. Whatever confession he had been about to make would have to wait. "I'll be right back," she promised, touching his cheek briefly before hurrying out into the night. Everett watched her go, his face a mask of conflicted emotions. When she was gone, he moved to a loose floorboard near the hearth and pried it up, removing a small wooden box hidden there. Inside lay a medallion bearing the crest of a noble French family, his true identity. "Not tonight," he whispered to himself, replacing the box. But soon, the royal palace stood as imposing as ever, its white marble gleaming in the afternoon sun. Within its walls, however, much had changed in the 5 years since Princess Victoria's exile. The once bustling Great Hall now hosted fewer celebrations, and the king rarely left his private chambers except for matters of state. Duke Prescott strode through the eastern corridor, servants scurrying out of his path. At 55, he carried himself with the confidence of a man whose power had only grown with time. His thinning hair was now completely gray, but his eyes remained sharp and calculating. "Your Grace," the guard at the king's door bowed deeply. "His Majesty is with the royal physician." "I am well aware," Prescott replied coldly. "Step aside." The guard hesitated only a moment before complying. One did not refuse the Duke, not anymore. Inside, King Jefferson sat by the window, his once robust frame noticeably thinner. Dr. Wells was packing his instruments into a leather bag, his expression grave. "Your Majesty must consider reducing his workload," the physician was saying. The stress of ruling a kingdom at war cannot be reduced, Doctor," Prescott interrupted, closing the door behind him. "Perhaps your efforts would be better spent finding effective treatments rather than offering obvious counsel." The physician bowed stiffly. "As you say, Your Grace." He turned to the king. "The tonic for your sleep, sire. No more than 3 drops." After the doctor left, Prescott poured wine for himself and water for the king, who had been advised against spirits. "More border skirmishes?" Jefferson asked, his voice weaker than it had been even a month ago. "Nothing our forces cannot handle," Prescott assured him, sitting across from his nephew. "The French continue to test our defenses, but they lack the resources for a full campaign." The king nodded absently, his gaze drifting to the window and the kingdom beyond. Strange how a conflict that seemed so imminent 5 years ago has stretched into this endless state of neither war nor peace. Prescott sipped his wine, watching the king carefully. "The French are devious. They prefer to bleed us slowly rather than face us openly on the battlefield. Like my mother's illness," Jefferson murmured. "A slow bleeding." The Duke stiffened slightly. "Lady Eleanor's constitution has always been delicate. We should be grateful she has survived this long. In truth, the Queen Mother's illness was largely a convenient fiction, one that Prescott had carefully orchestrated. After Victoria's exile, Lady Eleanor had become increasingly difficult, questioning the Duke's influence and attempting to speak privately with her son about diplomatic alternatives to conflict with France. Keeping her confined to her chambers, under the guise of protecting her fragile health, had been necessary. "I should visit her today," Jefferson said, setting down his water. "Perhaps tomorrow would be better, Your Majesty," Prescott suggested smoothly. "The trade ministers are waiting for your approval on the new tariffs, and the military council requires your signature on the requisition orders." Jefferson sighed. The weight of the crown seemed especially heavy these days, particularly without Victoria's vibrant presence to lighten his burden, though he would never admit it aloud. He missed his daughter desperately. "Very well," he conceded. "Bring the documents." As Prescott left to retrieve the paperwork, the king's mind wandered to memories of Victoria. Her exile had been necessary, her betrayal with the French diplomat an unforgivable compromise of state security. Yet in his private moments, Jefferson wondered if the punishment had fit the crime. Perhaps he had been too harsh, too quick to judge. But Duke Prescott had been adamant. She chose a foreign lover over her own blood, her own kingdom. He had reminded Jefferson countless times. Such treason cannot go unpunished, even from a princess. especially from a princess, down a secluded wing of the palace. Far from the king's chambers, Lady Eleanor sat by her own window, her silver hair elegantly arranged despite her confinement. At 70, she remained a formidable presence, her mind as sharp as ever, despite her supposedly fragile condition. "My lady," her loyal handmaid Agnes whispered, entering with a tray. "Your tea," Eleanor smiled, recognizing their daily ritual, while Prescott's appointed minders believed they were bringing the Queen Mother harmless chamomile. Agnes secretly infused it with ginseng and other strengthening herbs. Small defiances that had helped Eleanor maintain her faculties, despite the sedatives regularly slipped into her meals. "Any news?" Eleanor asked quietly, taking the cup. Agnes placed a folded piece of paper beneath Eleanor's napkin while arranging the tray. "The messenger returned from New Orleans yesterday. All is proceeding as you hoped." Eleanor nodded, her eyes momentarily gleaming with their old fire. Lawrence, the French diplomat whose execution Victoria had witnessed, had indeed survived, secretly spirited away on Eleanor's orders. It had been a desperate gamble, but the Queen Mother had recognized in Lawrence a potential ally, a diplomatic connection that might one day prove vital. "And Victoria?" she asked, her voice catching slightly on her granddaughter's name. Agnes's expression softened. Still in Oakridge, still serving as a healer, the child grows strong. Eleanor closed her eyes briefly. Her great-grandson, a boy she had never met. Jefferson must be told the truth about Lawrence, about Victoria's innocence, all of it. "It's too dangerous." "My lady," Agnes cautioned. "The Duke's control over the king grows stronger each day. The guards report that even the king's food passes through Prescott's servants first." Eleanor's eyes narrowed. She had long suspected Prescott of slowly poisoning her son, nothing immediately fatal, but compounds that weakened him over time, making him increasingly dependent on his uncle's guidance. "Then we must find another way," she declared, "before it's too late." In the palace kitchens, far below the royal chambers, Cook supervised the evening meal preparation with practiced efficiency. 30 years of service had taught her to navigate palace politics without becoming entangled in them. She served the king, whoever wore the crown, or whispered in his ear. Yet even Cook had noticed troubling changes. The Duke's personal servant now insisted on tasting the king's food for poison, a reasonable precaution, except that Cook noticed the king seemed to weaken after meals rather than being strengthened by them. "The special herbs for the king's broth," Prescott's man reminded her, placing a small packet on her work table. "Of course," Cook replied neutrally, though her suspicions grew daily. That evening, as servants throughout the palace lit candles against the gathering darkness, a young stable boy named Thomas slipped through servants' corridors carrying a message. Lady Eleanor had few allies left in the palace, but those who remembered her kindness during better days remained fiercely loyal. Thomas paused at the sound of voices around the corner. "It's spreading beyond the northern villages now," a guard was saying. "They're calling it the weeping fever. Starts with spots on the chest. Then the eyes weep blood before the end. Another peasant disease?" his companion dismissed. "It won't reach the capital. This one's different. My cousin in Millerton says it took 20 people in 2 days, including the mayor and the local physician." Thomas waited until they passed before continuing his mission. Though the news troubled him, his own family lived in a northern village not far from Oakridge. In the council chamber, Duke Prescott sat alone after the other advisors had departed. His careful plans were finally bearing fruit. The mysterious illness sweeping the northern provinces, while unfortunate for those affected, provided a perfect opportunity to consolidate power. With the king increasingly indisposed and no heir apparent, Victoria having been officially disinherited, leadership would naturally fall to the king's closest blood relative in a time of crisis. Prescott had been patient, working methodically for years. Now, with reports of disease spreading, he could position himself as the kingdom's salvation. There was only one loose thread in his carefully woven tapestry: Victoria. While in exile and stripped of titles, she remained Jefferson's only child. If the king ever discovered that the evidence of her treason had been fabricated, that there had been no French troop movements, no conspiracy with Lawrence, he might reinstate her. Prescott had placed informants in Oakridge to monitor the former princess, reporting that she had borne a son and established herself as a local healer. Hardly a threat, yet her royal blood remained a potential complication. Perhaps this spreading illness would solve that problem naturally. The next morning, the palace awoke to shocking news. King Jefferson had collapsed during his morning audience, a thin trail of blood leaking from his eyes, the telltale symptom of the mysterious plague that had been ravaging the northern villages. Dr. Wells was summoned immediately, but his face paled upon seeing the king's condition. "I've read reports of this fever, Your Majesty, but have no experience treating it. None of the traditional remedies have proven effective." Jefferson, still conscious though weak, looked to Prescott. "The people, are they being cared for?" "All possible measures are being taken," Prescott assured him, already mentally drafting the decree that would name him regent during the king's illness. "Your Majesty must focus on recovery." As the king was helped to his chambers, Lady Eleanor received the news through her network of loyal servants. Her reaction surprised even Agnes. "We must send for Victoria," she declared, suddenly energized. "She has the knowledge to treat this." "My lady, the Duke would never allow—" "Not the Duke," Eleanor interrupted. "My son. Jefferson will send for her when he realizes no one else can help." Her eyes gleamed with determination. "And when she returns, the truth will finally emerge." In his private study, Prescott penned orders to reinforce the guards at the palace gates and on the roads leading to the capital. Disease made people desperate, and desperate people were unpredictable. As he sealed the documents with his signet ring, a faint smile crossed his face. Chaos was opportunity for those prepared to seize it, and Duke Prescott had been preparing for a very long time. Rain pounded against the dirt roads of Oakridge, turning them into rivers of mud. Victoria hurried between houses, her cloak offering little protection against the deluge. 3 more cases of the mysterious fever had appeared in the village since yesterday, all showing the same progression of symptoms: high fever, chest rash, and finally, the horrifying weeping of blood from the eyes before death claimed them. "Mrs. Miller's taken a turn," Martha called from her doorway as Victoria passed. "The spots have spread to her neck." Victoria nodded grimly. "I'll come to her next. I'm checking on the Cooper children first." Inside the Cooper home, Victoria found all 3 children huddled on a single straw mattress, their mother applying cool cloths to their foreheads. The youngest, only 4, looked up with glassy eyes as Victoria entered. "Have you brought medicine, Miss Victoria?" he asked weakly. Victoria forced a reassuring smile. "I've brought something to help with the fever." Yes, she didn't mention that none of her remedies had yet proven effective against the full progression of the disease. She could ease suffering but had found no cure. After examining the children and preparing a tea of willow bark and elderflower, Victoria continued her rounds through the village. The disease had appeared suddenly 2 weeks prior, first striking a traveling merchant who had collapsed at the village tavern. Since then, it had spread with frightening speed. When Victoria finally returned home, soaked and exhausted, she found Everett waiting anxiously at the door. "Gabriel?" she asked immediately, fear clutching at her heart. "Still healthy," Everett reassured her. "I've kept him inside as you suggested. He's reading by the fire." Relief washed over her as she stepped inside, shedding her wet cloak. Gabriel looked up from his book, his face lighting up at the sight of her. "Mama, Mr. Everett taught me to play chess today," he exclaimed. Victoria kissed his forehead, grateful to find it cool. "Did he now, and did you win?" Gabriel giggled. "Not yet, but he says I'm learning fast." After Gabriel was tucked into bed, Victoria collapsed at the kitchen table where Everett placed a bowl of stew before her. "Eat," he instructed. "You've barely stopped all day." Victoria nodded gratefully, though her appetite had diminished with each new case of the fever. 2 more deaths in Millertown, she reported quietly, and a rider came through saying it's reached the western provinces now. Everett's expression darkened. "They're saying it started in the capital." Victoria looked up sharply. "The palace. No one knows for certain, just rumors." He hesitated. "There's more. A traveling merchant passed through this morning while you were at the Smiths. He said the king has fallen ill." The spoon froze halfway to Victoria's mouth, despite everything. The exile, the pain, the years of separation. The news struck her like a physical blow. Her father, the man who had sentenced her to this life, was ill with the same disease she had been fighting unsuccessfully for weeks. "Victoria," Everett said gently, covering her hand with his, "it may not be true. You know how rumors spread." She nodded mechanically, but her mind was already racing. If the king truly had the fever, he would be receiving the best care in the kingdom. Yet if the royal physicians were as powerless against this disease as she had been, "I need to try something different," she said suddenly. "The traditional remedies aren't working. Madre Sarah once told me about ancient combinations of herbs used during the Black Death. treatments considered too risky by modern physicians. Risky how? Everett asked, concern evident in his voice. The dosages can be toxic if measured incorrectly, but desperate times. She trailed off, her mind already cataloging the plants she would need. 3 days later, Victoria had created a new tincture, combining foxglove, henbane, and other herbs in precise amounts. She tested it first on Mrs. Miller, whose condition had seemed hopeless. To her amazement, the spots began to recede within hours, and by morning, the fever had broken. Word of Victoria's success spread quickly. Within days, villagers who had been at death's door began to recover. Not all were saved. Those too far gone could not be brought back. But for the first time since the outbreak began, hope flickered in Oak Ridge. On a particularly foggy morning, Victoria was gathering fresh foxglove when she noticed a small party of travelers approaching the village. Something about the lead rider's posture caught her attention, a regal bearing that seemed out of place in this remote area. As they drew closer, Victoria realized they were no ordinary travelers. Though dressed in simple clothes, the men moved with the disciplined precision of royal guards. The leader, an elderly man hunched in his saddle, was wrapped in blankets. Despite the mild spring air, Victoria felt a jolt of recognition, though she couldn't place why. She quickly gathered her basket and hurried back to warn Everett of the strange visitors. By the time she reached the village square, the riders had already arrived. Martha was directing them toward the tavern, the only place in Oak Ridge that offered rooms to travelers. "Victoria," Martha called, spotting her. "These men need your help. Their companion is ill." Approaching cautiously, Victoria studied the elderly man as 2 guards helped him dismount. His face was partially hidden by a gray beard, but his eyes, though sunken with illness, were a striking blue that stirred something in her memory. "He has the fever?" Victoria asked, maintaining a safe distance. "Yes," one guard answered. "We heard there was a healer here who had found a treatment." The sick man looked up at the sound of her voice, and their eyes met. A flash of emotion crossed his face. Recognition, surprise, perhaps even fear. "I'll examine him," Victoria said, unnerved by his stare. "Bring him to the tavern's back room. It's cleaner there." Inside the dim room, as Victoria unpacked her medicinal supplies, the guards stationed themselves outside the door, leaving her alone with the patient. "Where does it hurt most?" she asked professionally, keeping her focus on her work rather than the man's unsettling gaze. "Victoria," the man whispered, his voice cracked with age and illness. "My daughter." Victoria froze, the bottle of tincture nearly slipping from her fingers. Slowly, she raised her eyes to truly look at the man before her. Past the beard, past the ravages of disease and time, the king's features emerged. So familiar, yet so changed. "Father," she breathed, the word strange on her tongue after so many years. Jefferson reached for her hand, his own trembling. "I didn't know if you would recognize me." "Why are you here?" Victoria asked. Instinctively pulling away from his touch, 5 years of exile hardened her heart against the rush of conflicting emotions. "The palace physicians could not help me," he admitted. "When reports came of a healer in Oak Ridge who had found a cure," he coughed, a rattling sound deep in his chest. "I had to see for myself if it was you." Victoria studied him clinically. The spots were visible on his neck and hands, early stages, but progressing rapidly. His eyes showed no signs of bleeding yet. There was still time. "You came in disguise," she observed, continuing to prepare the medicine. "Duke Prescott would not have allowed it otherwise. He insisted the journey would kill me faster than the disease." A bitter smile crossed Jefferson's lips. "Perhaps he hoped it would." Victoria's hands stilled. "What do you mean?" The king looked around cautiously before lowering his voice. "I believe I have been poisoned slowly over years, and now this convenient plague." He shook his head. "But that is not why I came. I needed to see you." "Victoria, to know that you survived, that you—" He trailed off, taking in her simple clothes, her strong hands, so different from the pampered princess he had exiled. "That I what? Suffered adequately for my crimes." Victoria couldn't keep the edge from her voice. "That you lived," he said simply. "After what I did to you. After Lawrence." "Do not speak his name," Victoria cut him off sharply. The mention of Lawrence still had the power to crack her carefully constructed defenses. "You have no right." Jefferson nodded in acceptance of her anger. "I am dying, Victoria. I have come not only for healing, but for truth and forgiveness. If you can find it in your heart." Victoria measured the tincture carefully. her professional training taking over despite the storm of emotions. "I will treat you as I would any patient. Forgiveness is another matter entirely." She handed him the medicine, watching as he drank it without hesitation. "Rest now. I'll return to check on you tonight." Outside, Victoria leaned against the tavern wall, her legs suddenly unsteady. 5 years of exile, of building a new life from nothing, and now the architect of her punishment lay ill before her, dependent on her skill for survival. As she walked home through the village that had become her true home, Victoria watched children playing, women washing clothes, men repairing fences, the simple life she had come to cherish, and among them Gabriel, helping Everett carry firewood, laughing at something the man had said. Her son, her family, her life now. The king might have come seeking forgiveness, but Victoria wasn't sure if she was ready to give it, or what it would mean for the future she had so carefully built from the ashes of her past. Victoria couldn't sleep that night. She paced the small cabin, her mind racing with the day's unexpected developments. The king, her father, lay ill in the village tavern. Dependent on her skills for survival, the irony wasn't lost on her. "You should rest," Everett said, watching her from his chair by the fire. "You've been treating the sick all day. How can I rest?" Victoria stopped pacing and faced him. "My father is here, Everett, the man who exiled me, who had Lawrence executed in front of me." Everett's expression tightened at the mention of Lawrence, as it always did. "Does he know about Gabriel?" "No, at least I don't think so." Victoria sank into the chair opposite him. "What do I tell Gabriel? He's too young to understand all this." "The truth," Everett suggested gently, "or as much of it as he can handle, that the sick man is his grandfather." Victoria laughed without humor. "His grandfather, the king. How do I explain that without explaining everything else?" Before Everett could respond, a knock at the door startled them both. Martha stood outside, her face grave. "The old man at the tavern is asking for you," she said. "Says he cannot sleep for the pain." Victoria gathered her medicine bag, avoiding Everett's concerned gaze. "I won't be long." The tavern was quiet when Victoria arrived, most patrons having departed for the night. The king's guards stood vigilant outside his room, though they looked weary from travel. Inside, Jefferson was sitting up in bed, staring at the flame of a single candle. The medicine had reduced his fever, but the rash had spread further across his chest. "You should be lying down," Victoria chided, falling back on her healer's authority to mask her unease. "I've spent too much of my life lately in bed," Jefferson replied. "Weakness has become my constant companion." Victoria mixed powdered valerian root with warm water. "This will help you sleep." As she worked, she felt her father's eyes studying her, taking in the calluses on her hands, the simple braid that had replaced her once elaborate hairstyles, the quiet confidence in her movements. "You've become a remarkable woman," he said softly. "Far more so than you might have been as a princess." Victoria stiffened. "If that's meant as justification for what you did..." "No," he interrupted. "Nothing justifies my actions. I was a fool, manipulated by those I trusted and blinded by my own pride." He accepted the sleeping draft from her. "Your mother would be proud of who you've become." The mention of her mother, dead since Victoria was 12, brought unexpected tears to her eyes. She turned away, busying herself with reorganizing her supplies. "There's something I must tell you," Jefferson continued, his voice growing urgent. "Something I should have told you years ago, but Duke Prescott..." He trailed off, glancing toward the door. "What is it?" Victoria asked, her professional demeanor faltering at the desperation in his tone. Jefferson leaned forward, lowering his voice to barely above a whisper. "Lawrence may still be alive." The world seemed to tilt beneath Victoria's feet. "What?" she managed, the words strangled in her throat. "I cannot be certain," Jefferson admitted, "but your grandmother, my mother, hinted at it before Prescott isolated her. She said she had arranged his escape, that the execution was staged." Victoria's hands trembled as she grasped the edge of the table for support. Lawrence alive, after all these years of mourning him, of building a new life with their son, of slowly opening her heart to Everett. Why? She finally asked. Why would she save him? Eleanor always had her own agenda, her own network of spies and allies. She saw value in Lawrence, as a diplomat, as a connection to France. Jefferson paused, studying his daughter's shocked expression. "I didn't want to give you false hope. The information could be wrong. Or he could have died since then." Victoria nodded mechanically, her mind reeling. "I need to go," she said, gathering her bag with unsteady hands. "Take the entire draft. I'll return in the morning." Outside, the cool night air did little to clear her thoughts. Lawrence alive. It seemed impossible after witnessing his execution. Yet something had always felt unfinished about his death, a lingering doubt she had buried beneath years of survival and rebuilding. When she finally returned home, Everett was still awake, tending the fire. One look at her face told him something was wrong. "Victoria, what happened?" She couldn't meet his eyes. My father says Lawrence might be alive." The poker Everett was holding clattered to the floor. In the sudden silence, Victoria finally looked up and was stunned by what she saw. Not surprise, but a flash of recognition quickly masked by concern. "Everett," she questioned, a new suspicion forming. "What do you know about this?" He stood slowly, his face a battlefield of conflicting emotions. "Victoria, He stopped, then seemed to come to a decision. Moving to the loose floorboard near the hearth, he pried it up and removed a small wooden box. "I should have told you long ago," he said, his voice strained. "But I feared losing you and Gabriel." Victoria watched, bewildered, as he opened the box and removed a medallion bearing an ornate crest she had never seen before. He placed it in her palm, the metal warm from being kept close to the fire. "This belonged to Lawrence," Everett said quietly. "It bears our family crest." "Our," Victoria repeated, the implication dawning slowly. "What are you saying?" Everett's shoulders slumped, as if a great weight had been pressing on them for years. "Lawrence is my twin brother." The medallion fell from Victoria's hand, clattering to the floor as she backed away. "No, that's not possible. We were separated during childhood," Everett continued, making no move to approach her. "Our parents were French nobility who opposed the revolution. When the violence escalated, they sent us to different relatives for safety. I was raised in England, Lawrence in France." Victoria's mind was spinning, trying to reconcile the man she had come to love with this revelation. "Why are you here? In Oak Ridge?" Pain flickered across Everett's face. "When I received news of Lawrence's supposed execution, I wanted revenge. I tracked you to Oak Ridge, planning to use you somehow against your father." "Use me." Victoria felt sick. "And Gabriel? Was he just part of your plan too?" "No." Everett took a step toward her, then stopped when she flinched. "Victoria, please." "Yes, I came with vengeance in my heart, but then I met you, saw your strength, your dignity despite everything you'd lost. I watched you build a new life here through sheer determination." His voice softened. "And I fell in love with you, with Gabriel. The revenge I sought became meaningless compared to what we found together." Victoria struggled to breathe, the foundations of her carefully constructed life crumbling around her. "You've been lying to me for 5 years. Not about my feelings," Everett insisted. "Never about that. And Lawrence, did you know he was alive?" Everett shook his head. "I believed him dead until recently. 2 days ago, I found a hidden compartment in this medallion." He picked it up from the floor, twisting the outer rim until it clicked open, revealing a tiny folded paper. "It contains a coded message only Lawrence and I would understand. It was written after his supposed execution." Victoria took the paper with trembling fingers, but couldn't focus enough to read it. "What does it say?" "He was taken to New Orleans as part of his cover, forced to marry the daughter of a governor there." Everett hesitated. "Victoria, there's more. Weeks ago, I sent a letter to contacts in New Orleans, trying to confirm if he was truly there. I received a reply yesterday, but with all the chaos of the fever, I hadn't found the right moment to tell you." "Tell me what?" Victoria asked, though part of her didn't want to hear the answer. "Lawrence is indeed alive, but he's no longer in New Orleans. According to my contact, he was sent back to the capital several months ago." Everett's gaze was pained but direct. "He may already be at the palace." Victoria sank onto a chair, overwhelmed. Her father here in Oak Ridge, Lawrence possibly alive and at the palace, and Everett, the man she had come to trust, to love, revealed as Lawrence's twin, an imposter who had entered her life seeking revenge. "I need to be alone," she whispered, rising unsteadily. I can't think clearly." "Victoria," Everett began, but she cut him off with a raised hand. "No, not now. I have a patient to care for at dawn, and I need to make sense of all this." She moved toward the door, pausing with her hand on the latch. "Don't follow me." Outside, she leaned against the cabin wall, tears streaming down her face. The night sky stretched endlessly above her, stars cold and distant like the truth she had just learned. Everything she had believed about her life these past 5 years had been built on lies. As dawn broke over Oak Ridge, Victoria made her decision. She would return to the palace. Not for her father, not for Lawrence, and certainly not for Everett, but for herself, to face the past she had been exiled from, and to finally learn the complete truth. Only then could she decide what future to build from the ashes of these revelations. "You're leaving." Gabriel's voice was small and confused as he watched Victoria pack a small bundle of clothes and medicines. "Can I come too?" Victoria paused, her heart breaking at the innocence in his question. After a sleepless night wandering the village, she had returned home at dawn to find Everett had packed her medicines and prepared traveling provisions. He had kept his distance, respecting her need for space while making her journey possible. "Yes, my love," she said, kneeling to meet Gabriel's eyes. "And yes, you're coming with me. We're going to the capital." Gabriel's eyes widened. "The big city, with buildings tall as trees." Victoria managed a smile. "Even taller. And we're going to stay in a very special place called the Palace." "Why are we going?" he asked, the natural curiosity of a 5-year-old cutting straight to the heart of matters. Victoria exchanged a glance with Everett, who stood silently by the door. "The sick man we've been helping is actually your grandfather. He needs my medicine. And there are others at the palace who are ill too." Gabriel considered this solemnly. "Is Mr. Everett coming with us?" The question hung in the air. Victoria had been avoiding this very topic all morning. "No," Everett answered when Victoria remained silent. "I need to stay and help the people here who are still sick." He knelt beside Gabriel. "But I'll come find you soon. I promise." Gabriel threw his arms around Everett's neck. "Don't forget to feed the chickens. And Thunder gets lonely if you don't talk to him." Thunder was the old plow horse that Gabriel had adopted as his special friend. "I won't forget," Everett assured him, his voice thick with emotion as he hugged the boy tightly. Victoria looked away, unable to bear the sight, despite her anger at Everett's deception. She couldn't deny the genuine love he had for Gabriel, for both of them. When the king's guards arrived with horses, the entire village gathered to see them off. Martha stepped forward, pressing a small cloth-wrapped bundle into Victoria's hands. "Seeds from your garden," she explained, "so you can grow your remedies wherever you are." Victoria embraced the older woman. "Thank you for believing in me when no one else would." "You earned every bit of respect you have here," Martha replied firmly. "Don't forget that, no matter what fine clothes they put you in." As they prepared to mount, Everett approached Victoria one last time, keeping his voice low. "There's something you should know about Prescott. My sources say he's been poisoning your father slowly for years. The fever may be his final move to seize power." Victoria stared at him. "And when were you planning to share this information?" "I only confirmed it yesterday, Victoria." He hesitated. "I know I've lost your trust, and I deserve your anger. But be careful at the palace. Prescott is more dangerous than you know." She wanted to dismiss his warning as another manipulation, but the genuine concern in his eyes gave her pause. "I'll be vigilant," she finally said. Gabriel was placed on a horse with one of the guards, while Victoria rode alongside her father, whose strength was gradually returning thanks to her treatments. As they departed Oak Ridge, Victoria looked back one last time at the village that had been her home for 5 years, at the people who had become her community, and at Everett, a solitary figure watching them until they disappeared from view. The journey to the capital took 3 days, during which Victoria continued treating her father while answering Gabriel's endless questions about the city and the palace. She explained that his grandfather was a very important man, but carefully avoided using the word king until she could prepare him properly. When they finally crested the hill overlooking the capital, Gabriel gasped at the sprawling city below. Victoria felt a strange tightness in her chest at the sight of the gleaming palace in the distance. Once her home, then her prison, now a place of reckoning. "It's so big," Gabriel exclaimed. "Do people get lost?" "Sometimes," Victoria admitted, memories flooding back of secret passages and hidden gardens where she used to escape her tutors. As they approached the city gates, Jefferson, who had maintained his disguise throughout the journey, turned to Victoria. "We should enter discreetly. Prescott has spies everywhere. And if he learns I've returned with you," Victoria nodded in understanding. They took a lesser-known entrance, avoiding the main boulevards in favor of narrow side streets. Even so, Victoria pulled her hood lower, acutely aware that despite the years and changes in her appearance, she might still be recognized. The palace itself proved easier to access than expected. Jefferson knew routes used by servants and guards that bypassed the main gates. Victoria held Gabriel's hand tightly as they navigated dimly lit corridors, the boy's eyes wide with wonder at the ornate surroundings. "Through here," Jefferson whispered, leading them to a small door hidden behind a tapestry. "These were your grandmother's private chambers. She'll shelter us while we determine our next move." The door opened to reveal a modestly appointed sitting room, where an elderly woman sat by the window. Lady Eleanor looked up, her aristocratic features lighting with shock and then joy. "Victoria," she breathed, rising unsteadily. "Is it truly you?" Victoria stood frozen, a tumult of emotions washing over her at the sight of her grandmother. The last time they had spoken was the night before her exile, when Eleanor had promised to find a way to help her, a promise Victoria had long ago dismissed as empty comfort. "Grandmother," she acknowledged stiffly. "You look well for someone supposedly at death's door." Eleanor smiled wryly. "Prescott's fiction, designed to keep me isolated, though his medicines might have made it truth eventually." Her gaze shifted to Gabriel, who was half hidden behind Victoria's skirts. "And who is this young man?" Before Victoria could respond, Gabriel stepped forward with the directness of childhood. "I'm Gabriel. Are you my great-grandmother? You look very old." A genuine laugh escaped Eleanor. "Indeed I am, child, very old and very happy to meet you." She looked at Victoria with knowing eyes. "He has Lawrence's bearing." The name hung in the air between them. Victoria finally asked the question that had haunted her since her father's revelation. "Is he truly alive?" Eleanor nodded solemnly. "Yes, I arranged his escape the night before his supposed execution. It was a risk, but I saw in him a potential ally against Prescott's warmongering." "Where is he now?" Victoria demanded, unsure whether she hoped to hear he was far away or close at hand. "Here in the palace," Eleanor confirmed. "Working as a diplomatic envoy under an assumed name, few know his true identity." Victoria felt dizzy with the confirmation. Lawrence, alive, here, her first love, Gabriel's true father, a ghost made flesh after 5 years of grief. "Does he know about me? About Gabriel?" "He knows you were exiled to Oakridge," Eleanor said carefully, "but not about the child. I thought it best to leave that revelation to you, should your paths ever cross again." Gabriel, growing bored with the adult conversation, had wandered to examine a mechanical clock on the mantel. Jefferson approached him cautiously, fascinated by this grandson he'd never known. "He's thriving," he observed quietly to Victoria. "You've raised him well, despite everything I did to you." "Not despite it," Victoria corrected. "Because of it. In Oakridge, away from court politics and royal expectations. He's been able to just be a child." Eleanor gestured them to sit. "We have much to discuss, and little time. Prescott does not yet know of your return, but his spies are everywhere. We must move carefully. First, tell me about the fever," Victoria insisted. "Has it truly spread throughout the palace?" "Yes," Jefferson confirmed. "Dozens have fallen ill. The royal physician is at a loss." "I'll need to examine the sick immediately," Victoria said, "but Gabriel must be kept safe from infection." "My handmaid Agnes will watch over him," Eleanor assured her. "Her quarters are in a separate wing, away from the sickness, as if summoned by her name." An older woman entered through a side door. Agnes curtsied deeply at the sight of Victoria. "Princess, it brings joy to my heart to see you returned," she said warmly. "I'm no longer a princess, Agnes," Victoria reminded her. "Just a village healer now." "You are what you were born to be," Eleanor interjected firmly. "And what the kingdom needs now more than ever." Victoria bristled at the implication. "I didn't come back to reclaim any title. I came to help the sick and to learn the truth, all of it. And you shall have it," Eleanor promised. "But first, we must address the immediate crisis. Prescott has called a council meeting for tomorrow to propose himself as regent, while Jefferson is indisposed, if he succeeds. I fear your father will not survive the week." Victoria processed this information, Everett's warning echoing in her mind. "I need to see the patients, assess how far the disease has spread, and I'll need certain herbs. Some may be in the palace gardens, others I'll have to send for." "Whatever you need," Jefferson agreed eagerly. As Agnes led Gabriel away with promises of sweet cakes and stories, Victoria prepared to face the sickness spreading through the palace. Yet her mind kept returning to one overwhelming reality. Somewhere within these walls walked Lawrence, the man she had mourned for 5 years, the father of her child. A ghost returned to life, And somewhere in Oak Ridge was Everett, Lawrence's twin, the man who had entered her life with revenge in his heart but had stayed to become something far more complex and precious. Between these two men, one she had loved in youth, one she had grown to love through hardship, lay a decision Victoria wasn't yet ready to face. First, she had a plague to fight, and a conspiracy to unravel. The palace infirmary was overwhelmed with the sick and dying. Victoria moved from bed to bed, examining patients with practiced efficiency that surprised the royal physician, Dr. Wells. "You've developed considerable skill during your absence," he observed, watching her prepare tinctures with precise measurements. Victoria didn't look up from her work. "Necessity is an excellent teacher, doctor." In Oak Ridge, there were no royal physicians to call upon when fever struck. She had spent the entire day assessing the outbreak, confirming her suspicions that it was identical to the disease she had been treating in Oak Ridge. However, the palace cases showed an unusual consistency and progression, too consistent for a natural spread. "These symptoms," she murmured to herself, examining a nobleman whose rash followed an unnatural pattern. "They're being induced, not caught," her father's words echoed in her mind. "I believe I have been poisoned slowly, over years. What if the plague was actually a calculated poisoning?" Victoria slipped into the palace gardens where she had spent countless hours as a child. Many of the medicinal plants Madre Sarah had taught her to recognize still grew there, though the garden appeared less tended than in her youth. As she gathered foxglove and henbane, a shadow fell across the path. Victoria turned, herbs clutched to her chest, to find herself face to face with Duke Prescott. "My eyes must deceive me," he said, his voice as coldly smooth as she remembered. The exiled princess returned like a specter from the past. Victoria straightened, meeting his gaze steadily. 5 years ago, she might have trembled before him. Now she saw only a calculating old man whose schemes had cost countless lives. No specter, Duke Prescott, merely a healer, come to treat the sick. "Indeed," his thin lips curved in a mirthless smile. "How fortunate that your skills should be available just as this terrible affliction strikes. One might almost call it providential." The accusation was clear in his tone. Victoria ignored it, continuing to gather herbs. "I've been treating the same disease in Oak Ridge for weeks. It seems to have started in the palace and spread outward." Oak Ridge," Prescott circled her slowly. "I've received reports of your life there. The disgraced princess turned village healer, raising a child, living with a mysterious farmer." He paused meaningfully. "Did you know your protector had been making inquiries about Lawrence?" Victoria's fingers tightened around the herbs, but she kept her expression neutral. "My life in Oak Ridge is no concern of yours. Everything in this kingdom is my concern," Prescott countered, "including your sudden reappearance. Does the king know you've returned?" "My father is aware," Victoria said carefully, noting how Prescott's eyes narrowed at the confirmation. "He's responding well to treatment." Prescott's face hardened. "How unexpected?" "The reports I received suggested his condition was graver." "Reports can be misleading," Victoria replied, brushing past him toward the palace. "If you'll excuse me, I have medicines to prepare." "Victoria," Prescott called after her, his voice deceptively gentle, "consider your position carefully. You were exiled for treason. Your return without royal decree could be construed as further defiance." She turned back, fixing him with a level gaze. "I was summoned to heal the sick. Once that duty is fulfilled, I will address my legal status." As she walked away, Victoria could feel Prescott's cold gaze boring into her back. The encounter confirmed her suspicions. The Duke was behind both her father's long-term poisoning and the current plague. With the king seemingly at death's door, Prescott was positioning himself to seize power, but he hadn't counted on her return, nor on her medical knowledge. Back in Eleanor's chambers, Victoria found her father considerably improved after several days of treatment. Gabriel sat on his lap, showing him a carved wooden horse that Agnes had given him. "Look, Mama," Gabriel called when she entered. "Grandfather says he'll teach me to ride a real horse when he's better." Victoria smiled at her son's excitement, though her heart ached at how quickly he had adapted to palace life. In just days, he had gone from a simple farm boy to the grandson of a king, accepting the transition with the resilience of childhood. "That sounds wonderful," she said, setting down her basket of herbs. "But first, Grandfather needs to take his medicine." As she prepared the tincture, Victoria quietly relayed her encounter with Prescott. Jefferson and Eleanor exchanged concerned glances. "He'll move quickly now," Eleanor predicted, Your return has forced his hand. The council meets tomorrow, Jefferson added. Prescott will propose himself as regent, citing my illness and absence. Then you must appear, Victoria insisted. Show them you're recovering. Jefferson shook his head. I'm not strong enough yet to convince them, and if I appear too suddenly recovered, Prescott will know his poisoning has been discovered. Then what do we do? Victoria asked, frustration evident in her voice. A soft knock interrupted them. Agnes entered, her face pale. My lady, there's someone here asking for the healer. He says it's urgent. Victoria tensed, fearing Prescott had sent guards to arrest her. Who is it? He wouldn't give his name. Just this. Agnes held out a small piece of paper. Victoria unfolded it and gasped. Drawn on the paper was a simple symbol, 2 intertwined circles, the same mark she had once seen tattooed on Lawrence's wrist, a family emblem he had shown her during their secret meetings. Send him in, she said, her voice barely steady. The door opened and a hooded figure entered. When he lowered his hood, Victoria's heart stopped. It wasn't Lawrence who stood before her, but Everett. Forgive the deception, he said quickly, noting her shock. I couldn't risk writing my name. What are you doing here? Victoria demanded, acutely aware of Gabriel watching with curious eyes. Mr. Everett, the boy cried, rushing to hug him. You came to find us, just like you promised. Everett knelt to embrace Gabriel, his eyes never leaving Victoria's. I did promise, didn't I? Victoria, Jefferson interrupted, clearly confused. Who is this man? Before she could answer, Eleanor stepped forward, studying Everett's face intently. The resemblance is remarkable, she murmured. You must be Lawrence's brother. Everett stood, bowing slightly to Eleanor. Everett Beaumont, Your Majesty. Lawrence and I were separated as children during the Revolution. Why are you here? Victoria repeated, still processing his sudden appearance. Everett's expression grew grave. I've brought proof of Prescott's treachery. He produced a sealed document from inside his coat. This was hidden in the medallion, the complete cipher key for Lawrence's communications as a spy. It reveals that Prescott has been working with dissident French factions for years, deliberately sabotaging peace efforts. Jefferson took the document with shaking hands. This would explain much, but how did you get into the palace undetected? The same way Victoria treated patients in Oak Ridge without royal training, Everett replied. I adapted, borrowed clothes from a guard, walked with purpose. He turned back to Victoria. There's more. Lawrence isn't just in the palace. He's been arrested. What? Victoria and Eleanor exclaimed simultaneously. Prescott discovered his true identity 3 days ago. He's being held in the East Tower, awaiting trial for espionage. Everett's eyes met Victoria's. They plan to execute him, for real this time, after tomorrow's council meeting. Victoria felt the room spin. Lawrence alive, imprisoned, facing death again. Everett here, risking everything to save the brother he had believed dead. And Gabriel, innocently caught in the middle of a tangled web of secrets. Love and revenge. We need to rescue him, Victoria stated, decision crystallizing in her mind. Not just for his sake, but because he can testify against Prescott. It won't be easy, Everett warned. The tower is heavily guarded. Jefferson rose shakily to his feet. I may be weak, but I am still king. But I can provide royal seals that will grant you access. And I know every secret passage in this palace, Eleanor added with a gleam in her eye. Age has its advantages. No one suspects an old woman of plotting. As they formulated a plan, Victoria noticed Gabriel had fallen asleep on a nearby settee. Exhausted by the day's events, she gently covered him with a blanket, then drew Everett aside. Why did you really come? She asked quietly. The truth. Everett held her gaze steadily. For you, for Gabriel, for the chance to make things right. He paused. And yes, for Lawrence too. He's my brother. Despite everything, you could have sent this information with a messenger, Victoria pointed out. You didn't need to risk coming yourself. Yes, I did. His voice was soft but firm. Victoria, I've lived with half-truths for too long. Whatever happens, whether you choose to stay here or return to Oak Ridge, whether you forgive me or not, I needed you to know that what we built together was real. My feelings for you and Gabriel were never part of any plan or deception. Victoria studied his face, so like Lawrence's, yet marked by different experiences, different choices. She had loved Lawrence with the passionate idealism of youth, but Everett, she had come to love through shared hardship, daily kindnesses, and the steady building of a life together. I don't know what the future holds, she admitted, But I do know that the truth matters, all of it. And tomorrow, we'll make sure it comes to light." As night fell over the palace, the 4 conspirators finalized their plan to save a kingdom, and in the process, perhaps redeem themselves. Dawn had barely broken when Victoria, dressed in the simple garb of a palace servant, slipped through the hidden passages Eleanor had described. Everett followed close behind, wearing the uniform of a royal guard, the king's seal tucked securely in his belt. "The East Tower has 3 entry points," Victoria whispered, as they navigated the narrow corridor. "The main staircase will be heavily guarded, but this passage leads to a service door used by those who bring food to prisoners." Everett nodded, his face tense with concentration. "And once we have Lawrence, we bring him directly to the council chamber," Victoria explained. "Father will time his entrance to coincide with ours. Prescott won't expect a confrontation from all sides." They paused at a junction where the passage split. The musty air carried distant echoes of palace life stirring above them. "Victoria," Everett said softly, touching her arm, "before we do this, before you see Lawrence, I need to know, what will you tell him about Gabriel?" Victoria had been asking herself the same question all night. The truth, that he has a son. What happens after that? She shook her head. One crisis at a time. The service entrance to the East Tower was guarded by a single sleepy-eyed soldier, who straightened immediately when he saw Everett's uniform. "Change of orders," Everett announced authoritatively, producing the king's seal. "The prisoner is to be moved before the council meeting." The guard examined the seal carefully. "Strange. Duke Prescott said no one was to enter without his express permission." "These orders supersede the Duke's," Victoria interjected, adopting the deferential tone of a servant. "His Majesty has shown signs of recovery and wishes to personally interrogate the prisoner." Doubt flickered across the guard's face, but the royal seal was impossible to dispute. He unlocked the door with reluctance. "I'll need to accompany you." "Of course," Everett agreed smoothly. As soon as they entered the dimly lit stairwell, he struck the guard with practiced efficiency, catching him as he collapsed. "Help me bind him." Victoria quickly tied the unconscious guard with strips of cloth they had prepared. "He'll be discovered eventually. We don't need much time," Everett reminded her. "Just enough to reach the council chamber." They climbed the winding stairs, the tower growing narrower as they ascended. At the top landing, another guard stood outside a heavy wooden door. This time, their story of transferring the prisoner worked without incident. The second guard, more concerned with protocol than his unconscious colleague below, insisted on accompanying them inside. "Prisoner," he called, unlocking the door. "On your feet, you're being—" Everett's blow silenced him mid-sentence. As the guard crumpled, Victoria rushed into the cell. A man sat on a narrow cot, his wrists shackled, his head bent. At their entrance, he looked up slowly, and Victoria felt the world stop turning. Lawrence, 5 years older, his face leaner, hair longer, but unmistakably the man she had watched die, or so she had believed. His eyes widened in shock as he recognized her. "Victoria," he whispered, as if fearing she was a hallucination. "How—" His gaze shifted past her to Everett, and the shock doubled. The twin brothers stared at each other in disbelief, neither having seen the other in over 15 years. "Later," Victoria interrupted, forcing herself to focus on their escape. "We have to get you out of here. The council meets within the hour." Everett searched the unconscious guard and found the key to Lawrence's shackles. As they fell away, Lawrence stood unsteadily, looking between his brother and Victoria with bewilderment. "I thought you were dead," Lawrence said to Everett. "And you," he reached for Victoria's hand. "I was told you remained in exile, that you had built a new life." "I did," she replied, gently withdrawing her hand. "But circumstances have brought me back, and now we need your testimony against Prescott." Lawrence nodded, understanding the urgency if not the full context. "He's been working against peace for years, manipulating both sides. I've gathered evidence from my position in New Orleans." "You can explain everything at the council," Everett said, handing Lawrence the guard's sword. "Can you walk?" "I've been imprisoned, not coddled," Lawrence replied, with a hint of his old spirit. "Lead the way." They descended the tower using the same hidden passage, Lawrence marveling at Everett's presence beside him. "How did you find me? How did you even know I was alive?" "Victoria first," Everett replied cryptically. "Then your medallion." Lawrence's hand went instinctively to his chest where the medallion had once hung. "You found the message. Years too late," Everett said, a wealth of regret in those 3 words. Victoria moved ahead, Giving the brothers a moment as she checked the passage ahead, their whispered conversation continued behind her. Years of separation compressed into urgent exchanges. "New Orleans," she heard Everett say. "Were you happy there?" "I built a life," Lawrence replied. "Not the one I would have chosen, but—" He paused. "Marie was kind. She didn't deserve to die so young." Victoria's steps faltered slightly. Lawrence had married in New Orleans. Of course she had known this from Everett, but hearing him speak of his wife made it painfully real. "And your daughter?" Everett asked. "Abigail," Lawrence said, his voice softening. 17 now, fierce, intelligent. "She remained in New Orleans with her mother's family when I was summoned back to the capital." Victoria froze, her hand on the wall for support. Lawrence had a daughter, a 17-year-old daughter. While she had been raising Gabriel in Oak Ridge, Lawrence had been raising another child in New Orleans. "Victoria," Everett called, concerned by her sudden stillness. "I'm fine," she managed, pushing forward. "We need to hurry. The council will be gathering." They emerged near the grand corridor leading to the council chamber, quickly blending into the growing crowd of nobles and officials. As they approached the massive doors, Victoria spotted Duke Prescott at the entrance, greeting council members with the confidence of a man about to seize power. Lawrence drew back instinctively. "He'll recognize me. That's what we're counting on," Victoria whispered. "But not yet. Wait for the king's signal." They slipped into the chamber unnoticed, positioning themselves behind a column near the back. The room was filling rapidly with council members and court observers. The atmosphere tense with anticipation. Duke Prescott took his place at the head of the long table, raising his hands for silence. "Esteemed council members, we gather today under grave circumstances. Our beloved king remains gravely ill, with little hope of recovery." Murmurs rippled through the assembly. Prescott continued, his voice solemn but his eyes gleaming with barely concealed triumph. "In such times, stability must be our priority. As the king's closest living relative and most trusted advisor, I propose that I be appointed regent until such time as—" He paused dramatically. "Until such time as the king either recovers or we must face the painful reality of succession." Victoria felt Lawrence tense beside her. "There is no legitimate succession without you," he whispered. "Prescott would take the throne himself, not if we succeed today," she replied. Prescott was now reading from a prepared document. "By the power vested in this council, during the incapacitation of King Jefferson, I, Duke Prescott, am hereby appointed regent with full royal authority. I believe any discussion of regency is premature," a strong voice interrupted from the main doors. The assembly turned as one to see King Jefferson standing in the entrance, pale but upright, dressed in full royal regalia. Eleanor stood beside him, her head held high. Despite her advanced years, Prescott's face drained of color. "Your Majesty, we had no idea you had recovered sufficiently to join us." "Evidently," Jefferson replied dryly. Moving slowly into the chamber, guards flanked him, their loyalties clearly secured overnight. "I find it curious that discussions of regency would proceed without consulting me." "Merely preparation, sire," Prescott backpedaled smoothly. "Contingency planning for the kingdom's security." Jefferson took his place at the head of the table, forcing Prescott to vacate the chair. "Speaking of security, I have discovered some troubling evidence regarding the plague affecting our people." Victoria recognized their cue. She nodded to Everett and Lawrence, and they stepped forward from behind the column. "Evidence that will be corroborated by witnesses thought long gone," Jefferson announced. Gesturing toward them, the council chamber erupted in shocked exclamations as Lawrence was recognized, the supposedly executed French diplomat, now standing very much alive before them. But the true shock came when a commotion at the side entrance drew all eyes. Agnes entered, leading a small boy by the hand, Gabriel, dressed in fine clothes befitting a prince. Victoria had not planned this. She shot a questioning look at Eleanor, who merely smiled enigmatically. "Your Majesty," Prescott sputtered. "What is the meaning of this interruption?" "Not an interruption, Duke Prescott," Jefferson replied, "but rather a completion. My daughter Victoria, wrongfully exiled, Lawrence Beaumont, falsely executed, and this child," he beckoned Gabriel forward, "my grandson and heir." Lawrence's gaze fixed on Gabriel, seeing his own features reflected in the boy's face. Understanding dawned in his eyes as he looked from the child to Victoria. "My son," he whispered, barely audible in the chaotic chamber. Before Victoria could respond, the doors burst open once more. A royal messenger rushed in. breathing heavily. "Your Majesty, a ship has just docked from New Orleans carrying diplomatic envoys, including..." He gestured behind him as a young woman stepped forward. She was tall and graceful, with dark skin and striking features that unmistakably echoed Lawrence's. Her eyes scanned the room before settling on him with recognition and joy. "Father," she called out. Lawrence's face transformed with emotion. "Abigail." Victoria watched as Lawrence's past and present collided in this chamber. His daughter from his marriage in New Orleans, and his son from his love affair with her, meeting for the first time amid a political coup. And in that moment of chaos, Duke Prescott made his desperate move. In the chaos of revelations, few noticed Duke Prescott's swift movement toward Gabriel. Victoria caught the flash of steel, just as the Duke grabbed her son, pressing a small dagger against the boy's throat. "Enough!" Prescott's voice cut through the commotion. The room fell instantly silent, horror spreading across every face as they realized the Duke had taken the king's grandson hostage. Gabriel stood frozen with fear, his eyes wide and pleading as they found Victoria's. "Release him immediately," King Jefferson commanded, his voice steady despite the terror evident in his eyes. "I think not," Prescott replied coldly. "Everyone remain where you are, guards. Drop your weapons or the boy dies." The royal guards hesitated, looking to Jefferson for direction. The king nodded grimly, and swords clattered to the floor. "Now," Prescott continued, backing toward a side exit with Gabriel, "this is what will happen. I will be named regent, not temporarily but permanently. The king will abdicate, citing his illness. The traitor Lawrence will be properly executed this time, and the former princess will return to exile." His eyes narrowed. "And to ensure compliance, the boy comes with me." Victoria took a careful step forward, her hands raised in supplication. "Please," she said quietly. "He's just a child. Take me instead." "Mama," Gabriel whimpered, tears streaming down his face. "The child is valuable precisely because of who loves him," Prescott sneered. A perfect insurance policy against betrayal. Victoria's mind raced. Throughout her years in Oak Ridge, she had learned to stay calm in emergencies, a skill that had saved countless patients. Now it might save her son. As her eyes darted around the room, she noticed a small pouch at her waist, the medicinal herbs she had gathered that morning. Among them was monkshood, deadly in large doses but a powerful sedative in small amounts. "At least let me give him something to calm him," she suggested, her voice deliberately trembling. "He's terrified. A frightened child is unpredictable, dangerous for both of you." Prescott hesitated, clearly annoyed by Gabriel's quiet sobbing. Quickly then, no sudden movements, Victoria reached slowly into her pouch, fingers finding the dried monkshood leaves. With practiced movements, she crushed them in her palm, releasing the potent oils. "Gabriel, look at me," she said softly, approaching them. "Everything will be fine." As she neared Prescott, Victoria stumbled slightly, seeming to catch herself against the Duke's free arm. Her oil-covered hand pressed firmly against his wrist, the potent herb absorbing rapidly through his skin. She backed away, nodding submissively to Prescott while catching Everett's eye with the slightest of signals. He had seen this technique before in Oak Ridge, Victoria using medicinal herbs as weapons when necessary. "Now," Prescott addressed the council, "we will formalize my regency immediately." He began dictating terms, unaware that the monkshood was already working its way through his system. Victoria watched his pupils dilate, his speech gradually slowing. When his grip on the dagger loosened fractionally, she gave Everett the signal. In a blur of movement, Everett lunged forward, knocking the knife away while Victoria pulled Gabriel free. Lawrence simultaneously tackled Prescott to the ground, the brothers working in instinctive harmony despite their years apart. The Duke collapsed, conscious but unable to coordinate his movements as the herb took full effect. "What have you done?" he slurred, glaring at Victoria with hatred. "A healer knows which plants harm as well as heal," she replied calmly, holding Gabriel tightly against her. "You'll live, Duke Prescott, unlike the many you've poisoned for your ambition." Guards quickly restrained the Duke, while Dr. Wells confirmed Victoria's assessment. Prescott was temporarily paralyzed but in no mortal danger. "Search his chambers," Jefferson ordered. "We'll find evidence of his poisoning scheme there," as Prescott was dragged away. The tension in the room dissolved into a flurry of activity. Council members clamored to distance themselves from the Duke's conspiracy, while servants spread news of the dramatic confrontation throughout the palace. In the midst of the chaos, Victoria found herself at the center of an impossible triangle, Gabriel clutching her skirts, Lawrence standing nearby with Abigail at his side, and Everett watching with guarded hope in his eyes. "Gabriel needs rest after such trauma," she said, defaulting to the practical concerns of motherhood to delay the inevitable conversation. "If you'll excuse us?" "Victoria," Lawrence called softly as she turned to leave. "We must talk." She nodded stiffly. "Later, when things are calmer." The afternoon passed in a blur of statements and evidence gathering. Victoria gave testimony about the poisoning symptoms she had treated in Oak Ridge, confirming they matched those of the palace plague. Lawrence provided documents proving Prescott's secret communication with dissident French factions, deliberately sabotaging peace efforts to maintain a state of conflict that enhanced his power. By evening, Prescott had been formally charged with treason and attempted regicide. The plague, revealed as targeted poisoning, was already receding as Victoria's treatments were distributed to the affected. In Eleanor's chambers, Gabriel finally slept peacefully after his ordeal. Victoria sat beside him, gently stroking his hair, when a soft knock at the door announced the conversation she could no longer avoid. Lawrence entered first, followed by Everett. The twin brothers stood side by side, so alike in appearance, yet marked differently by their separate lives. "He has my eyes," Lawrence said quietly, gazing at the sleeping child. "But Everett's stubborn chin," Victoria replied with a small smile. "He's been raised hearing stories of a brave, kind father who died before his birth. I never expected those stories would need revision." Lawrence nodded, understanding the complexity of their situation. "I have a daughter I've raised alone. You have a son you've raised without me. Our lives took paths neither of us could have foreseen." "What happens now?" Victoria asked, the question encompassing far more than she could articulate. The king entered before either man could respond. Accompanied by Eleanor, despite the day's tumult, Jefferson looked stronger than he had in years, as if Prescott's removal had lifted a physical burden. "I owe you all a debt that can never be repaid," he said, looking first at Victoria, then at the twin brothers. "You've saved not just my life, but the kingdom itself." He moved to Victoria's side, gazing down at his sleeping grandson. "I've been thinking about succession, about the future, Victoria. I want to restore your title and place in the line of succession." Victoria tensed. "Father, please hear me out," Jefferson continued. "You would be my heir, and Gabriel after you, the royal bloodline preserved." Victoria looked around the room, at her father offering the restoration of everything she had lost, at Lawrence standing beside the brother he had just found, at Gabriel sleeping peacefully, unaware that his entire future hung in the balance of this conversation. "5 years ago," she began slowly, "losing my title and privileges seemed the harshest punishment imaginable, but in Oak Ridge, I discovered something unexpected. Freedom. The freedom to build a life based on my own abilities, not my birthright." She stood, facing her father directly. "I don't want the crown, Father. The weight of it would crush everything I've become." She smiled gently at his crestfallen expression. "But that doesn't mean I can't serve the kingdom in other ways." "What are you proposing?" Jefferson asked. "Let me return to Oak Ridge. Not as an exile, but as your representative, a royal governor, if you will, tasked with implementing reforms that would ease the burden on rural communities." Victoria turned to Lawrence. "You've spent years as a diplomat. Your knowledge of international relations is invaluable to the kingdom. Your place is here, helping Father rebuild the trust that Prescott destroyed." Finally, she looked at Everett, her expression softening. "And you built a home with me when I had nothing. You loved Gabriel as your own. Whatever deception brought you to Oak Ridge, what grew between us was real." "What are you saying?" "Victoria?" Eleanor asked, though her knowing smile suggested she already understood. "I'm saying that the palace was my past, but Oak Ridge is my future." Victoria took a deep breath. "I'm going home, with Gabriel, and, if he'll come, with Everett." Everett's face transformed with quiet joy. "Always," he said simply. Lawrence nodded, acceptance and understanding in his eyes. "And Gabriel, will he know the truth about me?" "Yes," Victoria assured him. "He'll know he has a father here at court, and a sister." She glanced at the door where Abigail waited. "We'll build bridges between our lives, not walls." King Jefferson considered his daughter's proposal, seeing in it the wisdom and compassion that would have made her an excellent queen. "Very well. Oak Ridge shall become a model of new governance, with you as its administrator." As dawn broke over the palace the next morning, Victoria stood in the royal gardens, the same gardens where she had first met Lawrence, where she had learned herbal medicine from Madre Sarah, and where her life had begun its unexpected journey. Gabriel played nearby with Abigail, the two already forming a tentative bond. Despite the differences in their age and background, Everett watched them, his face peaceful in a way Victoria had never seen before.